Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. My name is Alex, and I'm so happy you're joining me today. Today, we're going to talk about something that many of you might be feeling right now: the fear of speaking English. If you feel nervous, worried, or even scared when you need to speak English, please know that you are not alone. This is a very common feeling for people learning a new language. In this podcast, I want to share some thoughts about this fear, why it happens, and most importantly, what you can do about it. First, let's talk about why so many people feel afraid to speak English. When I started teaching English years ago, I noticed that many of my students knew a lot of English words and grammar, but they were very quiet in class. They would not raise their hands or join in conversations. Later, when I talked to them, they told me they were afraid of making mistakes. They were worried that other people would laugh at them or think they were not smart. This fear is very normal. Think about it. When we learn our first language as children, we make many mistakes. But we don't worry about it because everyone around us is helping us learn. But when we learn English as adults, we often feel that we should speak perfectly right away. We put too much pressure on ourselves. Another reason for this fear is that we compare ourselves to others. Maybe you have friends who speak English better than you. Or maybe you watch movies and TV shows in English and think, I will never speak as well as they do. This kind of thinking can make us feel bad about ourselves and increase our fear. Sometimes, bad experiences can also make us afraid. Maybe you tried to speak English before and someone didn't understand you or corrected you in a way that made you feel small. Or maybe you had a teacher who was too strict about mistakes. These experiences can make us want to avoid speaking English. Our own culture and upbringing can also play a role. In some cultures, people are taught that it's bad to make mistakes or to stand out. If you grew up in such a culture, it might be extra hard for you to speak a new language because you're afraid of looking foolish. Now, let's talk about why this fear is a problem. The biggest issue is that if you're afraid to speak, you won't practice speaking. And without practice, you can't improve. It's like wanting to learn to swim but never getting in the water because you're afraid of drowning. You need to get in the water to learn how to swim, and you need to speak to learn how to speak. This fear can also make you miss out on many good things. You might avoid making friends who speak English. You might not ask for help when you need it. You might even limit your career choices because you're afraid to use English at work. In short, this fear can make your world smaller. But here's the good news. You can overcome this fear. Many people have done it before you, and you can do it too. So let's talk about some ways to become more confident about speaking English. The first and most important thing to remember is that making mistakes is not bad. It's actually good. Yes, you heard me right. Making mistakes is a necessary part of learning. Every mistake you make and then correct helps your brain remember the right way to say something. So instead of seeing mistakes as something to avoid, see them as stepping stones that help you move forward. The second important thing is to practice in safe, comfortable situations before you move on to more challenging ones. Don't start by trying to give a speech in English to a big group of people. Start by speaking English with one good friend who supports you, or join a small group class where everyone is learning, just like you. You can even practice by talking to yourself in English when you're alone. Another helpful tip is to prepare ahead of time. If you know you will need to speak English in a certain situation, like going to a doctor's appointment or having a meeting at work, take some time to think about what you might need to say. You can even write down some key phrases and practice them. This preparation can make you feel much more confident. It can also help to remember that most people are kind and patient. If you're speaking with someone and they see that you're trying your best, they will usually try to understand you and help you. They won't be focusing on your mistakes. They'll be focusing on what you're trying to say. Something else that might surprise you is that native English speakers make mistakes too. Yes, even people who have spoken English all their lives say the wrong word sometimes, or forget what they were going to say, or mix up their grammar. Nobody speaks perfectly all the time, so you don't need to aim for perfection either. Another helpful approach is to change how you think about speaking English. Instead of thinking, I have to speak perfect English, try thinking, I'm going to practice my English today. Instead of thinking, people will laugh at me if I make a mistake, try thinking, people will appreciate that I'm making an effort to speak their language. These small changes in your thinking can make a big difference in how you feel. It's also important to celebrate your progress. Learning a language is a long journey, and sometimes we don't notice how far we've come. Take time to think about what you can do now that you couldn't do a month ago or a year ago. Maybe you can understand more when you watch TV in English, or maybe you can have a longer conversation with an English-speaking friend. These are all victories to celebrate. Now, I'd like to share a personal story with you. I had a student named Minji who was very afraid to speak English when she first came to my class. She would write excellent answers in her workbook, but she would never speak up in class. I noticed this and gently encouraged her to try speaking in small groups first. She was very nervous, but she tried. Over time, she started to speak more and more. One day, she told me that she had made a phone call in English for the first time. She was so proud of herself, and I was proud of her too. By the end of the year, Minji was one of the most talkative students in the class. She still made mistakes, of course, but she didn't let that stop her anymore. Minji's story shows that you can overcome your fear. It takes time and courage, but it is possible. And the reward, being able to communicate with more people and express yourself in a new language, is worth all the effort. Let me give you a few more practical tips before we end today's podcast. First, find a language partner or a small conversation group. Talking with other learners can be less scary than talking with native speakers, and you can support each other. Second, use technology to help you. There are apps and websites where you can practice speaking English in a safe environment. Some of these even give you feedback on your pronunciation. Third, remember that listening is just as important as speaking. The more English you hear, the more natural it will feel when you speak. So listen to podcasts like this one, watch movies and TV shows in English, and listen to English songs. Fourth, be kind to yourself. Learning a language is hard work, and it takes time. Don't expect too much too soon. Celebrate each small success along the way. Fifth, make it fun. Find topics you enjoy talking about. Play games in English. Sing English songs. The more fun you have with the language, the less scary it will feel. And finally, remember why you want to learn English. Maybe you want to travel to English-speaking countries, or get a better job, or make friends from around the world. Whatever your reason, keep it in mind. This can give you the motivation to push past your fear. Before I end, I want to tell you something important. Your voice matters. Your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings, they all matter. And learning to express them in English gives you a powerful new way to share them with the world. So even though it's scary to speak a new language, it's also an amazing opportunity. I hope this podcast has been helpful to you. Remember, feeling afraid to speak English is normal, but it's a fear you can overcome. Take small steps, be patient with yourself, find supportive people to practice with, and celebrate your progress along the way. Thank you for listening today. Until next time, keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep speaking. Goodbye, everyone.